pictures here, you'll know that that leads to a potentially fatal illness, and it was due to anxiety. The medical books say, by the way, it was not due to anxiety. Let me tell you, they're wrong. In this case, it was due to anxiety. And so I bought a ticket to London. Fantastic move. Smart move, Bob, that was. Pat him on the back down there. And I heard, by the way, walking to Sydney University, said to myself, if I ever get out of this, I'm going to speak up for other people who are still back in this situation. So that's what I did quite a bit. But by the time then, I was slurring my R's, I was shy, I couldn't get up to give a talk like this, no way, you know, right at the back, and there's all sorts of ins and outs to this, but it's just a salient story when I look back upon it now. But I came to go down, you're welcome, come on in. I came to go down the Franklin River because I went to Tasmania to look for the Tasmanian tiger. After I came back from London, and yes, I did see Jimi Hendrix when he was brought in on a beer, and I've got that is a trolley, and I've got a story about that in this little book. And he'd been dead for 3 or 4 hours at that time. But when I came back from London on a ship, I worked my way back for a shilling that's 10 cents on a ship from London via Cape Town. And then they wanted me to do some work on cruise ships in the Pacific, so I did that for a while, and I got to Fiji, and here was a Australian Medical Journal with a job in Tasmania, so I took it for 3 months in Launceston because I wanted to look for the Tasmanian tiger and also see Lake Pedder before it was flooded. One of the most gently beautiful places on earth. Lake Pedder, the size, well, its beach extended the equivalent of 2 kilometres by 800 metres up at 300 metres above sea level in the mountains of Western Tasmania with a very fine pink sand beach and an extraordinary mirror of the mountains around it, which was flooded by the Hydroelectric Commission illegally in 1972, the year of the world's first Greens Party setting up in Tasmania, because there was nobody in the Parliament speaking up for this lake, and environmentalists decided they had to get in there. That was the only thing, had to replace them. They couldn't expect Labor or Liberal to give a voice to the ongoing destruction in Tasmania. And got to fly over Lake Pedder. I took this job and set up a search centre for the Tasmanian tiger. Well, I'll cut a long story short there, because the other guys who were there, 2 of them, were dead set that the tiger existed. I was a little bit sceptical. Might have been my ex-Presbyterian background that led to that, I don't know. But here's the thing, at one night I saw a big creature walking along the road, and I went back and got one of the other fellows that was there and said, "Come and look at this, Jeremy." So we got in the old 4-wheel drive and went back, and it was still there trotting along. And here it was, big creature, long tail, big, strong, hindquarters, sharp ears, long snout, and chocolate stripes across its back. Tasmanian tiger. It was a greyhound, a mutant greyhound. He went burlesque or berserk or whatever after this because, and said everybody, the reality was that it was more likely to get a mutant greyhound than it was that the Tasmanian tiger had persisted. By the way, that animal was shot out under fiat of the Tasmanian Parliament, both houses. 1888 passed a bill putting a £1 bounty on its head. Over 2,000 of them were shot for that £1 bounty. It's the only known case of deliberate government-directed and paid-for extinction of a species on the planet. And I'll come back to Tasmania and its politicians very shortly. But as a consequence of Lake Pedder, there was a meeting in the town hall in Hobart on March the 23rd, 1972, which was held down by hydro workers who'd come in, but nevertheless they took a vote on it to establish a new political party, and that is the world's first Greens Party meeting. It was a month later there was the Values Party in New Zealand established, and there were ecology parties and people's parties in Britain and France and Germany and elsewhere have set up, and now there's 100 Greens parties around the world. And the word green comes from the green bands of Jack Mundey and the Builders Labour's Federation in Sydney, who combined social action. They saved the rocks from being demolished and Kelly's Bush and a number of other things with environmental and heritage considerations. And Petra Kelly from Germany saw this, took the word green back to Germany, and De Grünen came from that. And so this is apocryphal, but here's the word green around the world in the big case G coming out of Australia. Well, I was on the steps of the Northern Regional Library in Launceston, and a guy came down who had a beard and he was a forester, and he said, "Bob, will you come down the Franklin River with me?" 1976. And I said, "Well, yes, if you'll come walking in the mountains with friends," which includes Alexa's father, Peter Thompson, back in 1976. And we did that walk, and Paul and I went down the river. Slight difficulty, social difficulty here, because I was going down the river with a gent. He had a wife and children, and you know, when blokes get together, like I'm sure women do, I don't think it'll be any different. You ultimately, if you're going to be away for 2 weeks, you get to talk about very personal things. So I thought to myself, I'm going to tell this bloke before I go. And I told Paul Smith that I was homosexual. The word gay wasn't there at that stage. And he had a laugh. And he said, "Well, Bob, I'm not." But I wasn't all that disappointed, you know. I faced the reality. But he said, "But I can tell a good-looking male the same as I can tell a good-looking trout." He was a trout fisherman. Comparison. I rang him the other day and told him about the story I've got in the book about that, and he said, "Oh, did you tell about the time halfway down?" He said, "Bob, you've made no move here. I'm such a good-looking guy," and so on. And anyway, we had a bit of fun down there. And afterwards, he encouraged me to say something about this. I did that on ABC TV, and the rest was very difficult at the first, I can tell you. I got hundreds of letters from people quoting St Paul, "Going to burn in hell," but lots of other people saying, "I'm a woman with a girlfriend, I'm a bloke with a boyfriend, or I'm homosexual in some way or other." I had one piece of misfortune. 10 years later, in 1987, after this Franklin trip, I was by then in the Tasmanian Parliament because I lost that election that Alexa was talking about due to sexuality. Every letterbox in the seat at Denison got a note saying, "Bob Brown wants your mandate," and uses a joke, you see, and references to articles, and I had supporters taking down notices and posters, and anyway, that has to be up with put when you're in a minority group that's discriminated against, and that's been, having got through that, that's been with me all the way down the line. Anyway, in 1987, I made a mistake, which is don't legislate on the run. So I was in the Tasmanian Parliament, and up came a bill to make the laws of Tasmania, particularly the criminal code, gender neutral. So instead of saying in the code, a man who is found guilty of rape, he will be sentenced to so-and-so, it was changed to a person who is found guilty of rape will be convicted and so-and-so, and throughout. Except section 123, which said that a male who has, forgotten the exact term, but something, congress or intercourse or whatever, against the laws of nature with another male will be convicted of 20 years in jail. And they weren't going to change that one. Now, I thought Labor was going to take this opportunity 10 years after Don Dunstan had got rid of anti-gay laws in South Australia, and 30 years after the Wolfenden report in Britain said this, we should reform homosexuality and prostitution to stop people going to jail for years and years and years. 1957, that report, it was a huge game changer for the world. And one of the reasons it was commissioned, and of course protection of the environment, and suddenly I saw a suite of ideas that melded with where I was thinking at the time, and so I've been agreeing ever since. And it's a hard thing to stand for politics. My hat's off to everybody who does, but it's a great privilege. And I spent 10 years in the Tasmanian Parliament till I couldn't stand another minute of it. And I got my 5 colleagues up to Liffey and 4 colleagues, and they understood, and I stood down, and it was a very good thing. I spent 3 years out of it. Anybody considering you're in a career trajectory and you're wondering whether you should take a break from it and do something else, do so. I know from my experience there is time. The most decorated Marine, US Marine of the Vietnam War, Lieutenant Colonel David Hackworth, grabbed me by the lapels once and said, "You've got to stop this forest nonsense, you've got to get into nuclear weapons, they're going to blow the world up." And I said, which I spent a lot of time on anyway, I said to him, "David, if that's the case, I'm going home to read a book. If there isn't time, there isn't time. Get on with whatever you're doing in life. If there is time, then take your time, because you'll be much better at whatever campaign it is, whether you're wanting to stop the obscene jailing in concentration camps of refugees coming to our country, as we're seeing under the big parties at the moment on Manus Island and Nauru. Whether you're wanting to protect the Yarra Ranges just north of this city, where the leadbeater's possum, the native faunal emblem of Victoria, is going to be extinct in the wild within 20 years, according to the world expert Dr. David Lindenmayer, unless they stop logging the Eucalyptus regnant forest, which is down to less, listen to this, less than 1% of its original natural wild forests. And when the bushfires in 2009 ripped through Victoria with that awesome human death toll, they took out half of what was left of the leadbeater possum's habitat, so the government doubled the rate of logging of what habitat wasn't burnt out to make up for allocation of logs to go to, amongst other things, to be wood chipped and made into paper. Or whether it is simply a creative pursuit that you have. We human beings live on creativity, much more than more goods, although I'd have to mention we are the wealthiest people ever on the face of the planet. If you measure us in the dollar terms, which are the measurement par excellence of the moment, this is Australia, UN figures, the wealthiest per capita nation on the planet in terms of goods we have, but also in terms of resources we have in store, natural resources. And we're richer than any society that precedes us. We're all in here richer than the kings and queens of the great age of Britain, France and Spain, for example, as individuals. And we don't know it. A survey in January last year found that of the OECD nations, 32, Australians were the least happy. We're the wealthiest people, the biggest whingers. And not only that, in September last year, we voted in a government knowing that it was going to lock up people on Manus Island and Nauru, and that a person's right to move from a place of great danger themselves or with their family, which 92% of Australians say, according to one opinion poll, they would do. They would pay a people smuggler to get themselves and their family out of a place, a war zone, place of great danger, to safety. Our response to that, as this country of the fair go, has been to say, if you come to this country under those circumstances which 92% of us ascribe to, we will bar you.